Amy Spatelnik, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Look, I don't have a ton to add beyond my remarks earlier, but I will just reiterate some key points. I think obviously my role here is to help contextualize what we have seen in Portland and what we expect to see in Portland in the national context. And I think it's so crucial that we understand it as such, that the violence, the extremism playing out on Portland's streets are sadly not isolated incidents, but are part of a much broader national and frankly global crisis of extremism. It's the natural culmination rather of months and years of disinformation, of hate, of conspiracy theories that have been churning and increasingly mainstreamed in so many ways. And while the ways in which this extremism manifests, from large-scale events like Charlottesville, Pittsburgh, or El Paso, to events on streets like what we've seen in Portland and other cities like Berkeley and beyond, to the record level hate crimes. It's important that we not separate these events, that we not separate these various forms of extremism, and rather see them as part of the record level domestic terror, extremism, and hate that we're seeing in this country. Obviously, there's so much to be done on so many levels of government, from the private sector and from the nonprofit space. My organization, Integrity First for America, is a nonpartisan C3 that has chosen to pursue accountability through civil litigation. We are suing the 24 neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and hate groups that orchestrated the violence in Charlottesville 4 years ago, with trial in 2 months. And I think that matters because accountability has been in such short supply. And so as we go into this weekend, it's so crucial that we put a fine point on the urgency of accountability when it's been so lacking, on the importance of understanding how these extremists operate, of not creating false equivalencies, of not allowing these extremists to make their message increasingly mainstreamed in the ways that they have in recent years, and rather that we make crystal clear that they have no place in our communities, in Portland, of course, but of course around the country as well. As we've seen what happened in Portland really just be a reflection, what is happening in Portland really serve as a reflection of this broader crisis with national and global implications. So I'll leave it there and pass it to my friend Eric Ward, and happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Amy. It's such a pleasure to be with everyone today, and thank you for attending. My name is Eric Ward. I'm Executive Director of Western State Center, a national civil rights organization based in Portland, Oregon, that works with communities in our region and organizations nationally to respond to hate violence and intimidation. I also laid out my remarks this morning at the rally. But I will this afternoon just revisit some of the points that I think are critical for us to understand as Portlanders, as Oregonians, and as Americans. It is that we know from prior anti-democratic mobilizations in Portland that the majority of attendees do not reside here, but travel to the city to engage in political violence. This will be the case again on Sunday. Attacks on our civil institutions haven't stayed within the Portland city limits. Over the last 5 years, as Portland has been left largely on its own to contend with this political violence, we have begun to watch it ebb and flow across the states. Today, we don't merely speak of Malheur in Portland, Oregon. We now talk about Cresswell, and a mayor who recently resigned because of pressure from far-right paramilitary organizations like the Proud Boys and others. We speak of Southern Oregon and government officials who have been threatened and harassed, school board members who have had to cancel public meetings, and of course, the attempted insurrection at the Oregon State Capitol. It is important for us to understand, right, that these attacks must be responded to. And we have to understand that our response can no longer to Portlanders having to wrestle with what is a national and state moment. Bigoted and anti-democratic groups want to sow chaos to promote their dangerous and exclusionary agenda as an alternative to local government. We need to understand this is not merely combat between counter-protesters and a authoritarian insurgency, but that the target is to undermine local governance. These groups benefit from a perception of lawlessness and fear. And we must understand that that is exactly what is intended to be spread this weekend. As I said earlier in the rally, violence at these events isn't a bug, it is a feature. The burden of responding to political violence, as I said before, can no longer be limited to a handful of leaders in a handful of jurisdictions such as Portland, Oregon, Multnomah County, and the metro region. It is time for county officials from around the community to begin to take responsibility. It should be noted that many of the agitators coming into our communities do not reside in Portland, that many of the leaders come from surrounding communities, and we need those communities to step up. Communities that benefit from the economic lifeblood that is Portland, Oregon. Portland isn't an island, and it is time for surrounding counties, the state, and the federal government to stop treating it as an island. If Portland is to be treated as an island, we should no longer be surprised when Portlanders begin to act as if we are on an island. It is time for real rapid response intervention from the state and all levels of the federal government, not just the kind of intervention we've seen in the past. I'm not here to relegate this to a conversation merely around criminal activity. We have to understand that these incursions are attempts to take advantage of the crisis and opportunities that Portlanders face each and every day. This is about developing a larger set of initiatives to prevent attempts to undermine local democracy. In Oregon and across the country, democracy is under assault. This crisis requires urgent actions and deep investment. Western State Center believes in a statewide pro-democracy platform to strengthen local democratic institutions and civil society to withstand these attacks. For example, we believe state government should be exploring several actions. Convene stakeholders from across the sectors to investigate and share best practices and policy reforms to combat the rise of anti-democratic activity in Oregon. Devote resources to state agencies to better equip them to face challenges from these political moments of violence. Send key public outreach professionals from crucial state agencies to communities facing these rallies, like the one Portland faces Sunday. We must strengthen paramilitary laws. We must also turn our attention to the increased harassment and violence towards journalists. The state needs to explore laws that provide better protection to those who simply work each day to tell Portlanders and Oregonians the stories and the news of the day. We must protect and support public employees who are burdened by increased intimidation and physical threats, including establishing a cross-jurisdictional local government task force to analyze threats regularly and coordinate responses to anti-democratic organizing. We must encourage information sharing. Those targeting Portland have often broken existing laws and rely on the lack of coordination from municipalities to continue flouting Portland's laws, values, and norms. Finally, we must expand and refine efforts at the Department of Justice, such as creating a desk at the Department of Justice to focus specifically on groups who seek to create political violence in our community. Now, I'd like to pass it over to Mayor Wheeler.
Thank you, Eric. And I want to thank both Amy and Eric for their comments, both this afternoon as well as earlier this morning. I appreciate your presence here and your important perspective. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are here today because, as you're well aware, the city, its public works bureaus and police bureau are certainly aware of, and we're preparing for a variety of potentially large gatherings being planned for early afternoon this Sunday, August 22nd. It is our understanding at this time that the gatherings will take place at Tom McCall Waterfront Park. I want to be clear, no permits have been requested or issued for these events. To prioritize public safety, City Council offices and city bureaus are working collaboratively along with local and regional law enforcement partners to prepare for these events. It's certainly my hope and expectation that these events will remain peaceful. If there are those who engage in non-peaceful behavior, we want you to know and understand that the city, the police bureau will respond to the situation to the very best of our ability, given the current legal and logistical constraints. I think folks are clearly aware that the city of Portland has long embraced and continues to support the most cherished of American values for generations, and that's the right to assembly and the right to free speech. But as we have seen in the past, these events can be subverted by people who come with the intent to commit either acts of violence or destruction, or sometimes both. To those people who want to engage in this kind of behavior, I say this: do not show up. If you do show up and engage in criminal conduct, you're subject to arrest and prosecution. We're coordinating our efforts with other law enforcement agencies and the district attorney on this front. As police commissioner, I've been meeting regularly with police and other bureaus to identify tactical responses. I can tell you that the police are developing an appropriate plan with adequate resources to prepare for the events. We have many eyes that will be trained on the events. We'll make arrests as people leave the park, or later if they engage in criminal conduct. Also, given the behavior that we've seen from these groups previously, there is often a desire to come with the intent of committing violence or engaging in fights. People should be aware, as the chief had said in his statement last night, people should not necessarily expect to see the police standing in the middle of the crowd trying to keep people apart. People need to keep themselves apart and avoid physical confrontation. We are dedicated to keeping the peace and protecting innocent bystanders from any potential harm. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the potential risk these situations create for our city's employees and our Portland police officers and other law enforcement agencies, and I want to thank them for their service. As Amy and Eric had mentioned earlier today, community partners and leaders, along with other elected officials, business leaders, community leaders, joined me in a virtual gathering to unite together, to denounce hate and violence, and to instead choose love. We've united across differences before to make the same call to action, to cast aside political differences and declare and reaffirm our shared values for this community that we all love so much. After 18 months of deadly pandemic and economic recession, wildfires, and other environmental crises, this is the time to support one another. There just is no more room for hate or violence in Portland. We reaffirm Portland's community value of passionate but peaceful demonstrations, and we reaffirm the importance of free speech. Destruction of property is not free speech. Assaulting each other is not free speech. We are dedicated to keeping the peace. Our ask is simple. We're asking you to choose love. Please join us. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Portland Police Chief Chuck Lavelle. Good afternoon, Chief.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Thank you to all for being here today. I want to reiterate much of what the mayor just spoke about. I know that everyone has been asking a lot of questions, and we have to be mindful to provide information without giving away tactical plans. So thank you in advance for understanding that. The rallies planned in Waterfront Park raise concerns that people may choose to confront and fight with one another. Similar events have happened here, and people have used or threatened to use weapons against others. I share community concerns about violent confrontations. Police officers are sworn to uphold the Constitution and all people's rights to participate in free speech and assembly, and we take that pledge seriously. However, acting out violently or causing injuries to other people are not constitutional rights. Violence is avoidable, and people should choose to act peacefully, even with those they disagree with. People can and should keep themselves apart and choose to avoid physical, violent confrontations. My message today is simple. If you're considering coming downtown to fight, threaten people, or participate in violence, stay away. If people do engage in violent activity or property destruction, they face arrest and prosecution. The Portland Police Bureau will monitor this event and will make arrests for crimes as resources allow. You should not expect to see police officers standing in the middle of crowds trying to keep people apart. Remember, arrests do not always happen in the moment. After past violent events, we have consistently conducted follow-up investigations, made arrests, and forwarded cases to the Multnomah County District Attorney for prosecution. Just because arrests are not made at the scene when tensions are high does not mean that people won't be charged with crimes. Sunday is an all-hands day. I'll be working, and the Portland Police Bureau has canceled days off. All available personnel will report for duty. I want to publicly thank all of our employees for coming in, especially those who will be working on their days off. I truly appreciate their dedication and resilience, and I'm grateful to their families for supporting them on another day we're asking them to come in for work. As I said, I can't talk about tactics, but want you to know community safety and the safety of Portland police officers is paramount. We'll be providing real-time community safety updates via our Twitter page throughout the day on Sunday. You can find us by searching the tag @Portland Police. Please monitor that channel for updates. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chief Lavelle. We'll now open it up for questions, and I believe most of the reporters know the rule here. Just raise your hand in the participant column so I can call on you, and I will start in the order that I see them. Jonathan Levinson, OPB, who is your question for? And what is your question?
I have one for the mayor and for the chief, if I am allowed. Mayor, you have said in the past that the community should take action against anarchists, in quote. You said make them hurt a little bit. Should the community take similar action against groups like the Proud Boys? And what's the difference if not?
From my perspective, this is about behavior. From my perspective as the police commissioner, it's not about politics, it's about actions. People have every right to express their First Amendment rights. They have access to free speech. Free speech, no matter how abhorrent, is still constitutional. But the minute somebody crosses the line and engages in either criminal destruction or violence, that is no longer free speech. And I would expect that they would be arrested and prosecuted, regardless of politics.
So just to follow up, the community should not take action against groups like the Proud Boys.
What do you mean action?
Well, this was your words back, I think, in March.
Yeah, and that was in reference to a specific question about an individual from, I believe, New York State who had rampaged through the Oregon Historical Society. It had come to my attention that that individual was a student at a private university in the area. And my statement at that time, and I stand by it today, was if that individual was in fact convicted of that crime, it was my hope and expectation that that private university would in fact expel that individual. That's what I was referring to. I didn't mean anything physical, just to be crystal clear, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, Jonathan, we got to move on here. I
Fair
got a lot
enough.
of hands up.
Fair
Thank
enough. I had a question for the chief. If I can.
No.
Okay, there you go. The law's laid down. All right, Liz Birch, Coin. Who's your
Yes,
question?
thank you. Yeah, my question is for the mayor. First off, I'm wondering if you can name these groups that you guys anticipate are coming. I'm also wondering with the concern on the strain on police resources, if you've had conversations with the governor about calling in the National Guard.
Yeah, thank you. Those are questions most appropriately answered by the chief. Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, we're clearly not the organization we were a year ago as far as staffing goes. We have about 145 less people. But within the resource constraints we have, we are preparing and working with partners to include Oregon State Police and local partners from the metro area to put together the appropriate resource package for this weekend.
So I guess to clarify, have any conversations happened with the governor about calling in the National Guard?
No, not at this point for this particular event.
All right, next question. Alex Zielinski from the Mercury. Who's it for?
Hi, yeah, my question is for the mayor. We've been at this juncture several times before a planned protest like this. I'm curious kind of what has changed in the way that you prepare for these kinds of events, and what have you learned over the past 4 years or more of these taking place and holding events like this to prepare?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Number one, it's maintain the balance, protect peaceful demonstrations, those who are gathering to exercise their constitutional rights to free speech and assembly. But for those who are engaged in either criminal destruction or violence, neither of which are free speech, hold them accountable. And where I think we've improved is not just here at the City of Portland with the Police Bureau, but also working with regional and state law enforcement partners, working with our local district attorney, working with others in the community. We have, I think, done a better job of identifying those individuals who are specifically engaged in criminal conduct and holding them accountable. In fact, I think there are something like 50 people that are currently being held accountable for felonies. We've seen a significant decrease in mass gatherings, and those are gatherings that are defined as more than 50 people. We've seen a significant decrease in mass gatherings that have led to either criminal destruction or violence since the beginning of the year. And what that tells me is that holding people accountable is working.
Tess Risky with the Willamette Week. Who's your question for?
Well, first, I don't think Mayor Wheeler or Chief Lavelle, I don't think you answered Liz Birch's question. I was hoping to hear your response. She had asked for you to name the groups you anticipate showing up. Can you answer that? And then I'll ask my question.
Chief, I'm going to turn intelligence questions over to you.
Yeah, I don't know that it's appropriate for me to name the specific groups, and we have, I think, maybe other people coming from out of town that have different affiliations, so I don't want to necessarily label them, but we've seen here many times groups with different political ideations or affiliations come to Portland and have violent clashes or interactions with each other. And I think, to the extent that we can urge those folks not to come here and participate in that type of activity, that's what we'll continually try to do.
Okay, thanks. And then for my question, either of you would be great if one of or both of you would answer. For the groups that are coming to Portland, do you consider those to be domestic terrorist organizations? Proud Boys and other groups, for example.
For my part, it's probably not appropriate for me to label people in groups. There is a process for those labels, but it's not necessarily my place to place those on people.
Yeah, I'll take a swing at this too. So being designated as a terrorist organization is a formal designation. And that's beside the larger point that we're here to address today. Anyone who comes into our community and is spreading their hate, their racism, their xenophobia, their white supremacist predilections, all of that is very intimidating to people who are here, particularly people of color. It causes people to be fearful. As we indicated this morning, it's counterproductive. It takes energy and resources away from people who really need help during this challenging time in our community. And so our basic message to them is you're not welcome here if that is what your intent is, period.
Do you consider them to be white supremacists?
Tess, we got to move on. We don't have room for follow-ups. I'm sorry. Maggie Vespa, you have a question?
Hi, yeah, this question, sure, thank you, is for the mayor and or the chief. It's in response to a comment the mayor gave earlier, so maybe he wants to speak to it. But Mr. Mayor, you said that people should not expect to see police keeping crowds apart and that people need to keep themselves apart, and kind of paraphrasing there. It felt like a reference to the criticism that the city got earlier this month when a rally kind of played out and opposing groups did fight each other in the streets, and we all have video of that. So I'm wondering, going into this weekend, if these groups don't stay apart and there are physical clashes, will police intervene this time? If not, when would they intervene?
I'll turn that over to Chief. That's a tactical question, Chief.
Yeah, I know it's one of those things. It's not necessarily the best tactical approach to have officers wading into situations where groups are clashing with each other. I understand the optics of that, but we have to make tactical decisions that put us in a position where we're likely to be successful in making an arrest or taking someone into custody. And there are just situations where that's just not a feasible approach. I mean, to the extent that we can, we will make arrests, whether it's after something takes place or if it's possible to make one at a different time, we'll do that. There's been many instances from things we witnessed this summer where we've gathered information, gone back, done follow-up, and made arrests. And I think to the extent that we have the resources and ability to do our mission safely, that'll be the priority for us.
Okay, I'm going to take 3 more questions. Maggie,
I did ask though, I did ask when would they intervene? I mean, just kind of if it's an all hands on deck situation, what is the mission then that you just said? If people are fighting.
Okay, going on. Joe English, K2. Joe, you have a question? Okay.
Yes, yes. Still here,
okay.
Still here. We got time?
Yep.
Okay. What can you tell the public to calm their fears that this is the spark that's going to start another fire of 30, 60, 90, 100 days of rioting in downtown Portland?
So I'll take a swing at that. First of all, the community coming together like we did this morning and stating very clearly what our values are about our support for First Amendment rights, but our strong community opposition to criminal destruction and violence. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is holding people accountable. If people cross that line into behavior engaging in either acts of criminal destruction or violence, we should hold them accountable. And holding people accountable has clearly made an impact. As I say, we've seen the number of mass demonstrations leading to criminal destruction or violence decline precipitously this year. And so I hope that's a trend that will continue. Right. And the third part is just getting the word out that if you're somebody coming from out of our community with the purpose of coming here and intimidating people or spreading hate or vitriol or causing fear, we don't want you to come here. We're unified as a community against that kind of behavior.
Okay, we got one more question. It'll go to Zane Sparling with the Tribune. Zane, final question.
Sam, can the mayor answer the question that was not answered a few minutes ago before you yelled at us?
That wasn't me.
I'm talking to Sam. Can we allow for the questions to be answered instead of getting yelled at?
I'm happy to answer the question. What was the question? I didn't hear the question.
I think it was Liz that got yelled at by Sam before.
I was talking to somebody else, Jonathan.
So Liz,
It was my question too, by the way.
I'm sorry, Liz, I didn't hear your question. Could I hear the question? We'll get to Zane after that.
I think it was Maggie Vespa's question. And I think she was asking when the police would intervene between the groups, right, Maggie?
Yeah, I appreciate it. And Mr. Adams, you are, in your role with livability, you're welcome to answer these questions too. I was just asking, what is the mission that the chief laid out? When would police intervene? That was part of my original question that wasn't answered. But again, Mr. Adams, please feel free to speak to it.
Maggie, thank you. And I appreciate the question. I will turn that over to the chief because I think he can better answer the tactical question of when officers would get involved. Chief?
Yeah, thank you, Maggie and Mayor Wheeler. I think really it's situation dependent. It's hard to say in this situation, that situation. I think it's where resources allow us to intervene and have a good likelihood of being able to either make an arrest, to protect someone who is being, who has maybe a life safety type issue going on in a conflict. That might be a situation where, officers would take steps to intervene into something right there. But there are many situations that it's not practical or effective for officers to wade into when you have groups clashing, particularly groups that sometimes are armed, who come there with weapons and things of that nature. And then you're sending an officer into that particular situation where, it's just not a safe situation for anyone in that particular moment. So, it's very hard to answer in specifics, but I would say it's really situation dependent, resource dependent, and things of that nature.
All right, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, but it's something, that's why the incident commander is in there to make those decisions at the moment when they monitor the whole situation. So no pat answer ahead of time. Zane Sparling, last question of the day.
Thank you for your time. One thing I'd like to say is I've been covering these protests for a while. The only time that opposing groups have not clashed violently is when there's a large police response. I'm thinking about Delta Park just last year, some of those protests in August of 2019. My question for you, Mayor Wheeler, is violence essentially inevitable? Can we put down the fig leaf and admit that violence is going to happen and there will not be police preventing those groups from clashing? And how does that feel to know that violence is almost on the calendar now?
Well, as you're aware, we have hundreds of demonstrations over the course of any given year, and very few of them actually result in any violence or criminal destruction. This weekend is one that we're certainly concerned about. That's why we've done a lot of preliminary planning. That's why we've been reaching out and collaborating not only with other government partners, but with the private sector, with our nonprofit partners, civil rights organizations and groups, community leaders, faith leaders, to do the best we can as a community to define ourselves not as a community of clashes and violence, but as a community of collaboration and partnership and love. And ultimately, I think that is a message that will prevail. In terms of your question, is it inevitable? There is certainly some internet back and forth, social media to suggest that there are people, some people who are coming specifically for the purpose to engage in a street fight. And what we're doing is we're telling them, hell no. If they come here and they engage in that kind of activity, we're going to do the best we can with the resources we have available to hold people accountable. And Tim, before we close this out, I also do again want to acknowledge my appreciation for Amy and Eric. I'd like to give them an opportunity. If there's anything that's been said or asked that they wanted to reflect on, I'd certainly like to give them that opportunity.
Okay. Amy, Eric, you have any other remarks?
No, I would just say, quickly, just in summary, I think that there are really three key points that all of us should remember heading into this weekend, and what I think is an evolution, right? The events of 2 weeks ago in Portland, the events in Los Angeles that occurred suggest an evolution in tactics in terms of political violence, and all of us need to be aware. Look, first, we have to be cautious of the political theater. Yes, there is political violence, but the goal of the political violence is to draw a larger narrative. And all of us have to remember that. The political theater that we see, right, is to provide a visual backdrop to this idea of Portland being a city of lawlessness. And we have to do a better job of interpreting that for Oregonians and making sure those who are the victims of that violence, right, business owners, folks who are trying to get to and from work each day, that we're also telling their stories and what it means for them. The second is look, we just have to admit, and this is hard for me as a person who leads a national organization on this issue. What I'm trying to say, right, is that there is not one city in this country on its best day that could carry the burden of this challenge on their own. And that's not because I don't think Portland could be the exception. What I'm saying is there is no city currently that has the answers to this. If Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles cannot figure this out, right, it is time for state and federal governments to really lean in. The third is this, right, that everyone on here knows I have my critiques, right, of law enforcement. But I also think it's important to be nuanced. And to be nuanced means to understand that this is not merely a criminal matter, right? And it's simply unfair for the rest of the city to also shirk its duties and to say this is up to law enforcement to solve. It's a broader issue. We're weak not just because of the demonstrations, but broader challenges. And we need help to address those broader challenges so that Portland is better inoculated. And so other cities are as well, right, to an attempt to subvert local democracy. Those are the three things that I would say. They may not be the most exciting things, but it's time for us to get back to the nuts and bolts of governance so that we can respond to this issue. We have to stop our own political theater.
Okay, Amy, if you don't have any closing comments, we will wrap it up for today. Amy, you good?
I am all good. I wholeheartedly agree with Eric, as always.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending. If you have any follow-up questions, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think most of the reporters have follow-up questions, a lot of them. I mean, you guys have answered questions all week.
Jonathan, we're done.
Is there going to be another time we can ask the mayor questions?
So Tim,
yeah.
Look, I can stick around for a bit.
Okay, there you guys go.
What's your question, Tess?
I think there's a few people who are before me. They want to go. I don't know what the order is.
Jonathan, you seem intent on asking a question. What is your question?
Sure, I'll ask the mayor. I mean, last year after the August 22nd violence downtown, you seemed in text messages to be a little dismissive of the violence, saying it was a product of living in a Twitter sphere. You saw it more as a comms problem. Do you think you took the danger posed by groups like the Proud Boys as seriously as you should have?
Absolutely, I took it as seriously as I should have. I don't know how many press conferences I held, how many community events I held, how many times I stood with leadership in the Black community and other communities of color to denounce violence, to denounce criminal destruction. So I absolutely took it seriously, and I continue to take it seriously. And today's events underscore that once again.
Yes.
This question's more for Chief Lavelle. I'm just wondering what the plan is now that RRT is dissolved. Are those same officers going to be responding, or does that change up your entire plan of how you approach this? Are you using CERT or mobile crisis units? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, not having the rapid response team will force us to make some changes on how we respond to just major crowd control events like this may end up being. That team was highly trained for responding in a coordinated manner to all types of civil unrest, but all of our Portland police sworn personnel have undergone crowd management training, and they continue to get updated training. A lot of them have experience in working in coordinated teams. We deploy mobile field forces, which are typically officers who come from patrol and then fill a role in crowd control. But I just want to reiterate, we're not going to deploy people to stand, in a line or in the middle of violent groups to keep people apart, where it doesn't make tactical sense to do so.
And are you
All right.
are you receiving assistance from Oregon State Police and the
Really?
Sheriff's Office?
We've had conversations with them. They'll be providing assistance where they can. I don't want to say specifically what roles they're filling, but we've met with them regularly this week, to include this morning. And we're reaching out to get whatever assistance that their resources will allow. And that's part of the planning that we do for all of these types of events.
Okay, let's share some time with other reporters. Bridget Chavez, you haven't had a question yet. Your hand's up.
Yes, thank you. This is for the mayor or for Chief Lavelle. What do you have to say about the low morale among PPB officers? And also earlier this week, we did a story with frustrated business owners trying to get police response. And we were told the problem people are experiencing with what seems like very limited police response is going to get worse. Do you guys agree with that? And who is to blame for that this problem is going to get worse?
Let me jump in on that. I did see the survey that was done by the men and women of the Portland Police Bureau. I take it seriously. It's not my place to tell them that the way they feel isn't right. They feel the way they feel, and they've reflected the low morale that they feel. I have heard them say that they don't feel supported. So my message back to them is then let's put the plan together. I heard earlier this week, the chief beginning to outline a specific strategy around how we improve recruitment, how we improve retention. I'd like to be able to bring to my colleagues on the city council a proposal that they can agree with that improves the staffing situation and the deployment situation in the Bureau. I want to make sure that the Bureau not only has the staffing, but the resources, the tools, and the training that the Bureau needs to be successful. And none of that should stand in opposition to our other goals around improving the police bureau, improving transparency and accountability. I don't see those objectives as being mutually exclusive. And I look forward to working not only with the command staff, but also the union and the rank and file to improve the morale. Our city employees should feel supported. They should feel proud in their positions. And in the case of the men and women who serve in the Portland Police Bureau, they should feel that they will return home each evening to their loved ones. And so I look forward to working with them, and I appreciate that they took the time to very clearly put together their concerns. And that goes for the RRT as well. I appreciate the follow-up conversations I've had with the leadership of the RRT. And I believe we all ultimately want the same thing. We want a police bureau that is properly resourced with the appropriate number of employees, with the appropriate tools and training, but that is also responsible and accountable to the community it serves and reflective of the community's needs.
Thank you for that, Mayor. Okay, very truly last question. Jack Forrest, you'd had your hand up for the longest time. Thank you for being patient.
Yeah, thank you. This is a question for the chief. Some self-proclaimed leaders of the quote-unquote Summer of Love event have said that they're actually moving the event from the waterfront. And I wonder how that changes the response to this and whether that's something that you guys are tracking.
I don't know about that particular event, so I don't know if I'm prepared to speak on it specifically, but we do track different things on social media and on different platforms just to get a sense of how we need to prioritize our staffing and our work. But that particular event or group, I'm not specifically informed enough to speak upon.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you all for being here. again, reach out to me with any follow-up questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.